Okay, I want to do just a quick overview of waterfowl and upland birds so that you are familiar with the terminology that we're using here. So first of all, when we say upland birds, we're referring to species that live in the uplands, so habitat reference. That is typically used for grassland species, not woodland species, and animals that aren't reliant on heavy wet soils for wetland vegetation or anything like that. So it's typically referring to grassland species in the uplands. Now, when we say upland game birds, we're referring to those that can be hunted for sport. And typically, all of these species are larger bodied birds. I should mention that most of the game birds are larger bodied birds, but that term upland birds can be referring to a vast variety of species, many of which are not larger bodied, but they are dependent on those uplands. Okay, so for the game birds, they are shaped like a chicken. They have heavy bodies, lots of meat, and therefore why they've been intriguing for hunters. Short rounded wings, they're not great flyers. In fact, they spend most of their time walking or running on the ground. They do not spend much time flying, for the most part, are non-migratory species. And if they are migratory, it's very short distance, maybe from higher elevation down to lower elevation. And they use their feet to scratch. So you'll notice if you look at their anatomy, their feet have long claws used for scratching, not for perching. They're eating grains and seeds on the ground, so they are some of our groundivores as far as their feeding habits. Okay, waterfowl typically refers to ducks, geese, and swans. It does not include shorebirds or seabirds, although we do have some sea ducks that get thrown into this waterfowl category. So this is a huge group when you hear this term waterfowl. And it is important to realize that not all waterfowl are ducks and there are many species of waterfowl that are not ducks. So those two words cannot be used interchangeably. They rely on water bodies or wetlands. This would be your opposite of the upland species, your lowland species, but we do tend to refer to them as wetland species. They eat a wide variety of different things. So some eat fish, some eat algae, some eat plankton, some eat vegetation in the water, seeds, aquatic insects, and it depends on the time of year how they're going to shift their diet for their specific needs at different periods of their life cycle. They all have webbed feet and are capable of swimming, although they are not all capable of diving down into the water, and your lab will go over the difference between divers and dabblers. They all have strong wings, and this group does perform long migrations. So very few species, and I actually can't think of any in this group that are not migratory species. Now, it is important to recognize that different locations will have what we call resident flocks. If you can meet all of your life needs in one area, then you have no need for migration. And that is what has happened to a lot of our urban Canada geese populations. And if you'll notice, we have Canada geese here year round, but during fall and spring, we have more here than we typically do. At this time of year, we have geese everywhere, right? And same thing in the fall. And the reason is because we have both our resident flocks and we have our migrating flocks coming through and intermixing during that time. Waterfowl have a distinct bill, and instead of it being called a beak, we call it a bill because it's broader and flatter, used for straining rather than probing or hooked for tearing meat, various adaptations within the bird group. Okay, so part of your lab is going to be looking at how to use wings to know what species of bird it is. So I want to show you this video from the wing bee on why it might be important to be able to recognize
for coarse flecking throughout this portion of the wing. It's a takeoff of the idea of a quilting bee, where people would get together to complete a project. So we have 40 or 50 people come in and work together for a week to process all these wings. So we call it a wing bee.
That's the last part of a survey called the Waterfowl Parts Collection Survey, which is a survey where we ask a sample of usually 6,000 to 8,000 hunters nationwide to send in a wing from every duck they shoot and the tail feathers and wing tips from every goose they shoot.
So we get the bag of mail that contains envelopes with the wings in it, and we have a person or a group of people at each site who's responsible for processing the mail. They look inside and see what species it is, write the species name on the outside, and we store them in the freezer. And this goes on throughout the hunting season. And then at the end of the hunting season, end of January and into February, is when we meet to process all the parts.
And we get help from a lot of Fish and Wildlife Service employees, but also from state agency employees. We can tell what the species composition of the harvest is. So that's one purpose of the survey. But then the age and sex information is value added. Age information, what we're able to tell from these parts is whether the bird was a young of the year bird or an adult bird. So that gives us a pretty good index every year of what productivity was on the breeding grounds the previous breeding season during the spring.
Okay, so in order to do that, you have to be able to identify different parts of the wing. So one thing I want to point out to you is the primaries and secondaries. So the primary feathers are your flight feathers. They're usually longer and on the leading edge of the wing. The secondary feathers are underneath. And the reason why they become really important is because the secondaries can be various colors. Often there's a white patch in there, and that's really important in identifying your dabbling ducks. So as you look at the dabbling ducks, you're going to really focus in on these feathers right here, and we call that the speculum. That dabbling ducks have a unique coloration to their speculum. The other group of feathers to really pay attention to is your coverts. The coverts are the top few layers of feathers here, and oftentimes you'll have a different shine or an iridescent coloration to these coverts, or they may be various shades of brown and gray. It's important to recognize that different light can make these feathers look like different colors, and I can not capture all of those colors in one still shot of a picture. So next semester, if you're on campus, make your way to 158 and feel free to look through the wings in the back of the classroom to really see the different iridescent colors that come through. I've tried my best in the pictures that I've taken of the wings to capture at least some coloration from the light. Okay, that's about it. A quick overview of feathers, wings, and different bird groups, and that should help you with your lab.